And we are live coming to you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are seeing this. Today, I am interviewing an old friend of mine and fellow entrepreneur. His name is Graham Wasilition. Graham and I, for those of you who are wondering, how do these two guys know each other? Just the brief story is when I got to Samsung Austin Semiconductor in 2006, probably around 2007, after I got my legs, I ran into this wonderful gentleman who is incredibly innovative and has the entrepreneurial spirit in him. And I remember meeting him and even catching a glimpse of that just in our conversation. A lot of it came from the perspective of his positivity and his can-do attitude. And so today we're talking really about two topics. So two topics that I want to ground us on. So one is his current venture, right? So Graham has done a lot of different stuff, and I'm going to let him talk about that here in a minute. We're going to talk about his current venture, which you can see he's got a bottle of it behind him. He's got all the swag. Is Tenneyson Black Ginger. This is a non-alcoholic alternative, and I'm going to let him talk about that here in a moment. And then we're also going to talk about Dry January, which has been massive for so many people. So those of you who've been watching my content know that I talk about this quite a bit because I'm a recovered alcoholic, and happily so sober as fuck, as they say. So I'm going to let Graham tell us a little bit about. So tell us about Tenneyson. So just go ahead and help me
Sure,
out.
but let me quickly say too, my experience meeting you back in '06, '07 timeframe was similar to that of yours meeting me. It sounds like I remember you stood out as well as being jovial, friendly, personable leader. So wanted to highlight that as
Thank you. I
well, and I
appreciate
remember
that.
that. No problem at all. So Tennyson. Super excited and super passionate about what we are doing here. And I kind of, after spending a couple years with you at Samsung, went the entrepreneurial route. And you want to start there, or do you want to
Yeah,
start
actually,
Tennyson?
yeah, that's a great lead. Yeah, go for it.
Sure. I think I was lucky enough to get a position when I started there that had good exposure to leaders within the company, right? So rather than entry level position where spending a lot of time on the factory floor, I was exposed to a lot of leaders, got to travel, and with that, it quickly got my brain thinking about, do I want to put in 20 years of kind of doing this same job to then be doing the same job 20 years from now. And I thought about the things, and again, this is a different sort of part of our lives, your life as well as my life, where I was interested in traveling well, eating well, drinking well, learning new things, having new experiences. This is right out of college, and the craft cocktail revolution was happening. So, right, coming out of college, kind of been drinking heavy. You have your first taste of professional life, a little bit of travel life, and I thought, what better way than to kind of get into this by starting my own actual liquor brand. And here in Austin, you had Tito, who was just starting to make some real good, kind of visible progress. Kind of at the time, he was obviously big in Austin and then big in Chicago, but that was kind of about it. Um, and I just basically started consuming articles and research about craft cocktails and what you can do and who was doing what. And long story short, I got in touch with this guy who is the author of the Absinthe Encyclopedia. Absinthe is a type of liquor that's traditionally made in France and Switzerland, and absinthe laws actually had just been not necessarily changed, but a little more defined here in the United States. So there was interest in the category, and I believed that there was a path forward by kind of creating a brand and positioning it like Patron did in tequila. So Patron kind of stood out in tequila back in the 80s and 90s and spent a bunch of money positioning itself as a super premium white spirit versus kind of the bad word of tequila. You wouldn't
Mhm.
drink tequila on a date. You wouldn't drink tequila with your potential father-in-law but now Patron has made that, you know, a totally kind of universal household thing to do. And we thought we could do the same thing in absinthe. And the hypothesis was the category is going to grow. Let's position a brand to take advantage of the growth of the category. Long story short, category didn't grow. We didn't raise enough to drive the category itself. And at our peak, we sold in about 9 different states with 9 different boutique education forward hand sell wine and spirits distributors. So selling a $60 bottle of something that tasted funny to Americans that was traditionally used as a dash or a rinse or a spritz in a cocktail didn't really move a lot of volume, and therefore the business, kind of as we originally hypothesized, didn't work out, and we wound that business down.
Before you transition, let me ask you something, and this is for all the entrepreneurs that are out there watching. I really appreciate you, having that vulnerability and truth telling around, hey, this thing, we did our best, we got it to a certain point, and in the end, there were some lessons learned. And I'm curious, what was the lesson learned from that experience of running the absinthe business?
Um, to be honest, we raised a little bit of money from friends and family, and I think raising money from people you have close relationships with, even though it was just a little bit of money,
Hmm.
um, complicates things a little bit. And especially as young as I was and sort of naive as I was, looking back on it, I wish I would have been much more prepared and uh, kind of ready to take the personal emotional connection that raising money from friends and family uh, introduces. So I think
Hmm.
that was one thing I was unfamiliar with. But I think as a young entrepreneur, the idea of, there's no way this is going to fail because, we're going to make it work is something that's a good thing to have. Right.
Hmm.
But you just have to kind of keep in mind that there are inherent risks involved with starting a business and taking money from friends and family. So I'd say that was probably the first thing. And then the second piece was to think through a business and a business plan. You have to go so deep and iterate so many times
Mm.
that, again, I'm not sure we did that with the original plan. The hypothesis was rather generic of, hey, we're going to do what Patron did in the tequila category, but do it in the absinthe category. But the real like nuts and bolts of how do you do that? How do you get liquid to people's lips? How do you get them to think about your product? How do you get them to work it into their lives, change their behavior? That type of stuff was not something we had thought through as much as we probably should have. But now, 15 years later, and a couple companies later, I think we're a lot better positioned to, you know, make some real progress with real brands.
Yeah. So then tell me about your new idea. What inspired you to develop this new idea?
Sure. So we're skipping over one really quickly. I just want to
Hmm.
highlight it. I co-founded a company called the Hate Stains Company. So we were hatestains.com, and we actually just closed on a sale of that company. A very
Hey,
nice,
congratulations.
positive. Thank you so much. Just closed on it last week. So, a lot of entrepreneurs start businesses, um, have some level of success, some level of failure, but don't ever get to successful sale of that business. So I consider myself super lucky to have the experience of doing it. Not to mention just kind of the notch on the belt of, hey, we have had a,
Yeah,
a, a win. So
absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
that
That's
is one
good to
business, and we can
acknowledge.
kind of get into some of the details about that if they pop up later. But now getting to where we are currently here, Tenneyson, plant-based alternative. I like to say better than alcohol alternative. So Tenneyson was actually the name of our original absinthe that we had launched, now 12 years ago. And I use the example of this entrepreneur named Sidney Frank. Sidney Frank owned an importing company. He passed away, I think, about 10 years ago, maybe a little more than 10 years ago. But he brought Jägermeister basically to the United States, married into an importing family in the 70s, started making some interesting choices with Jägermeister, making it a shot, kind of positioning it as, hey, you've got to be super tough to drink this Jägermeister thing, and it obviously hit well with college kids, chilled it down, and was a super success. So he also had imported a wine called Grey Goose, which didn't do too well. So he shelved it, and then years later he reinvigorated the name with a brand of vodka that we are most likely familiar with, and then grew that brand and sold it to Bacardi for over $2 billion. So I like to use him as an inspiration of Tenneyson Absinthe didn't really work out for us, but we kind of had it shelved for 6 years and then brought it back out because we had the domain name, social handles, some level of trademark protection and that type of thing. And it was never a big enough brand to be confusing for anybody. So we are using a little bit of like nostalgia recycling of the Tenneyson brand, but it's a totally new company, totally new partners, totally new approach. And that approach is I connected with one of my good friends who was a roommate of mine in college. I was actually the best man in his wedding. He was in my wedding, and he has similar entrepreneurial path, not necessarily in consumer goods the whole time, but about 4.5 years ago, he launched a company in the plant-based wellness space. It was a skincare company called Kanuka. It was a combination of cannabis and manuka honey. And he and I were talking about 2.5 years ago, saying, "Hey, what's next for us?" I had the Hate Stains company running smoothly with my partner Harry. He was doing a great job with it, and we said, "Hey, why not use some of my hospitality background, use some of his plant-based wellness background, and this category of people being interested in non-alcoholic products for the alcoholic occasion was just starting to bubble up." So we kind of call it like it's the third level right now, where the first level is products like O'Doul's that we have been familiar with for 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second level was kind of 2016, 2015, 2017. A couple new products started popping up. First one being Seedlip, which was a distilled non-alcoholic kind of spirit alternative, and it started getting a bunch of press and headlines, and people were interested in it. And then some more functional products started popping up in this third wave, kind of 2019, 2020, 2021. That, hey, instead of just removing the alcohol from a spirit, i.e., a non-alcoholic rum, non-alcoholic whiskey, non-alcoholic gin, I kind of want to feel like I'm doing something for myself. I'm not getting intoxicated, but at
Right.
least I'm serving my body and mind and soul in some fashion. And that's kind of the route that we took, where we used and picked a bunch of plants, herbs, botanicals, roots that have just general better for your skin, gut, and brain health properties. So you feel like you're having something a little more sophisticated, layered, complex, and leaning into that kind of cocktail experience, but we're not trying to mock or mimic the
Yeah.
intoxicating effects or flavors of a rum or a gin or a whiskey. Number one, they can be triggering for some people. Number two, when you take the alcohol out of a spirit, it doesn't necessarily kind of stand up to what your expectations are. And we wanted to be able to kind of define what a sophisticated adult beverage moment could be without being stuck in the box of these traditional categories that we would just kind of ultimately come up short in.
Yeah, and first of all, I want to just applaud just the level of analysis that you've done here, looking at the history of the non-alcoholic beverage space, and certainly, like you mentioned, like O'Doul's and all these NA beers that are out there, and these NA wines, and then transitioning into, as you call it, the functional beverages, and I think that's a wonderful term there. And you mentioned triggering, and I will say this, and I made some hint about this in another post, and maybe it was a video, but for me, as a recovered alcoholic, the idea of an NA beer or an NA wine or any of that is very unappealing. And because of the fact that I associate it with a feeling. And let's face it, after a certain point, people are not drinking beer because of the flavor. They're drinking it because of the effects. And to say I'm going to have a non-alcoholic beer. At least to me, it feels, I mean, for lack of a better term, it just feels like a gateway. It just
Hmm.
feels like I'm just inching that much closer to a relapse. So when I see a product like your product that not only is healthy, but there's no context of it's non-alcoholic whiskey or it's non-alcoholic vodka. Imagine that. Isn't that just called water?
Right.
It's non-alcoholic beer, whatever it is. Like to me, that's just so much more appealing. And as a recovered alcoholic, when I go out to a bar, when I have a purpose for it, be it, it's a social engagement with good friends or I've got coworkers, I have kind of my go-to beverages that are to me kind of special enough, right? Like what I mean by that is maybe like club soda and bitters, which
Hmm.
or maybe club soda and a lime or a splash of orange juice or something to just be a little bit more unique or more flavorful than, hey, I'll just have a ice water, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's what I do really really love about your product is this idea that it is healthy and it doesn't have that context associated with, let's face it, a drug, right? Like
Sure.
alcohol is simply a drug. So I do like that. So how tell me about how who's your ideal client and how's it been in terms of marketing it?
Sure, sure. So, want to highlight we have sort of soft launch. So we're still technically in soft launch. We haven't spent $1 on paid promo, ads, or PR. Everything that we have kind of earned so far. I love it. Everything that
Yeah,
we have earned so far has
I
been
was
that
just
earned.
chiming in. I saw Kenny over here asked, please display your delectable products for us to see. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to put that up there and then having a sip here.
Oh
But
yeah, please. So we like to say you can drink it neat, which it looks like you're drinking neat on the rocks or in a cocktail. But we
yeah.
also like to say, it's bold, just like the moves that we are making. So we want you to be prepared for, this is not like drinking a cranberry juice
Hmm.
by any means. It has some layers, has some sophistication, and it can actually punch you in the mouth a little bit. And not everybody is interested in drinking it neat or on the rocks, but that was the concept, and I think we've actually executed and delivered on that. So that if you, let's say you're making a no proof cocktail with two or three other ingredients, the Tenneyson is bold enough to be a base and stand up and not get lost in a mixed mocktail or zero
Oh,
proof
absolutely.
cocktail,
Yeah, I could
right?
just imagine adding in a little bit of club soda. I can definitely taste the ginger. There's also some citrus.
We
I'm
use
not
a
I'm
Valencia orange oil. We use a
yeah,
sweet orange oil.
yeah.
We use dandelion, bergamot, gentian root. It's a little bit bitter.
Mm,
Um, think of it kind of as maybe you would in a Amaro when it comes to like a traditional spirit category,
mhm.
which is a kind of blends of herbs and botanicals. But we don't use any refined sugars. We use a touch of responsibly sourced honey to
Yeah.
round it out just a touch.
I can
But
taste that honey, yeah.
we wanted it to be, again, going down the healthy route. We didn't want you to be, drinking a bunch of sugar.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
what I
it's
like about it,
low cal, caffeine free.
yeah, you described it as a punch in the mouth, but what I like is I don't feel after the punch, I don't feel a sting of an aftertaste. It has actually that's a very interesting thing. It has such a powerful flavor, but then the aftertaste is very clean.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's interesting because normally you don't get that, right? Like you get the flavor and then there's like an aftertaste that really remains, but it's very actually very clean.
Hmm. Cool. Thank
Mm,
you. So then,
I
kind of
dig it.
circling,
I dig it.
circling. I love it. I love a live on air
I
taste
know,
test.
and just for the people who are watching, I told Graham, I said, "I have left it in the bottle, I left it in a box until today, and I brought it out just to show it, and then and while he was talking about his history, I was slowly cracking the bottle open, and because I use a dynamic microphone rather than a condenser microphone, you didn't hear the crack, crack, crack." That's delicious.
Oh, great, great, great. And I think circling back to your question of who is our customer, right? I think the way that we had approached it was actually not not Stephen English being our customer of a recovered alcoholic or someone who was allergic to alcohol. We
Yeah.
wanted to deliver a product that actually worked really well for those people, but that is not who we're defining as our customer. We believe our customer is a crossover customer who still consumes alcohol,
Hmm.
but wants to take a more mindful approach to that alcohol consumption, whether it ultimately leads them to a sort of a zero proof lifestyle, or again, we believe that our customer is just a customer who's interested in moderating their drinking a little bit.
Hmm.
So that being said, our customer is a beer and wine drinker, but a spirits drinker kind of first. And we also lean into the thought of no and low proof cocktails.
Yeah.
So low proof cocktails being, hey, Tenneyson is a kind of a punch in the mouth and is strong and bold like it would have alcohol, but doesn't have any alcohol in it. So let's say if you are a gin drinker or a whiskey drinker, instead of pouring your full pour of gin or whiskey, you actually can pour a half pour and still feel like you are drinking a uh, full cocktail, but actually getting half as much alcohol, and therefore maybe can knock out more emails later in the night or get up for that, workout that you have early in the morning, or whether you have little children or whatever, your sort of
Hmm.
priority is, as well as supporting, in our household. I mean, we're definitely doing dry January, but I try to focus on the weekdays, Monday through Thursday, um, to be sort of zero proof days for myself. But
Yeah.
I tend to enjoy a beer and I tend to enjoy a cocktail. Um, but it just works really well that we have a 1 year shelf stability. So instead of
Oh,
being
that's
in your,
nice.
yeah, instead of being in your refrigerator next to your milk, you actually can still go to, where you have your wine set up or your,
Oh, that's
a
cool.
couple spirits bottles, and have it out on the shelf and be able to make the real time decision. Hey, it's Tuesday. Maybe instead of pouring my cognac or my bourbon or whatever it is that I would pour, why don't I pour myself a Tenneyson and kind of continue down the path of uh, my weekday program, right?
Yeah.
And we also believe just the conversation as a whole um, doesn't necessarily benefit as much from a, hey, we're for the sober community and support the sober community, and if you're not sober, fully
Right.
sober,
Yeah.
then we're not necessarily going to be open to welcoming you into the
Right.
community. And we understand that there are people in the sober community who need safe spaces and need a sober environment. Totally supportive of that, but we believe the conversation can have the most impact on a national, global scale by being inclusive to kind of the sober curious, um, and maybe moving some people further towards that sober lifestyle, but not necessarily saying, hey, we're a sober first and sober only company, if that makes
Totally.
sense.
Yeah, and no, it makes perfect sense, and I also see how, that conversation, number 1, is very healthy. Number 2, as a person who identifies as, sober and recovered and all that kind of stuff, I personally, and I know I may not represent 100% of the people in the community, as I'm sure I never really do, but I see it as I'm inclusive, right? Like I want to be helping somebody, whether or not that's like harm reduction, maybe like you said, stepping down a little bit from the way that they used to drink and to minimize that negative impact to them. And so, yes, I have friends who are still out there drinking, and I'm happy to suggest this idea to them, not necessarily as a replacement, but maybe as an adjunct or
Exactly. It's optionality. It's about
yeah, optionality.
optionality,
Yeah.
and rather than finding yourself in that situation where water doesn't seem to cut it, but
Right.
then your only options are, okay, well, I will have a drink just to feel a little more comfortable. I think Tennyson really delivers on scratching that itch for, I want something sophisticated and to feel included, and sometimes it's funny the way that my mind works about it. We have a little daughter, 14 months old, and my wife and I just kind of need a moment for ourselves to be able to kind of
Oh,
reconnect
totally.
after we put her to bed. And that cocktail sort of gives you a like a 20-minute, a 25-minute window to have that relaxed time. But you don't need the alcohol for it. I'm just looking for the time, right?
Yeah,
When it's, hey,
completely.
I want to pour something over ice and sip on it and have a conversation with her. And Tennyson really delivers kind of on that experience more so than us sitting down having a sparkling water.
Yeah, it completely. And I have some clients where, they're looking for something, some new routine that they can add that gets the same reward. So all of our habits in our life are based on three, say, components, right? There's a trigger, which, like you said, that might be the end of the night. After you put the kids to bed, it might be 5 o'clock, when you shut down the laptop. It might be when you walk out of the workplace and you get in your car and you start driving home. There's a trigger. Then there's a routine. And what I'm hearing from you is that, it seems like this could become a different routine that then gets the same reward of that relaxation, of that 20 minutes, just our time. And then so that just adds another option, right? And it reminds me of, like, people who used to take smoke breaks, and they would say, oh, I want to go relax, and yet we all know nicotine is a central nervous stimulant. So now, here it is, you have another option of something to do as a maybe a interstitial, right, between work and now sleep, or work and then whatever it might be, that's on the other side of that, just to have that you time. and
Right.
and
And
speaking of time, and go ahead if you wanted to say something there.
I was just gonna say really quickly, a lot of the feedback we get are people saying, "Oh, this helps me relax," and different things. And sure, we use some good herbs and botanicals that can promote those type of feelings, but my gut tells me it's almost as much of a placebo effect as
Completely.
anything
Mhm.
else. So I just wanted to make
Yeah,
that
no, that's
point.
a great point. Yeah, it's just the intentionality, right? You mentioned intention, and when the note that you sent to me, when you sent me this wonderful bottle, you used that word intention, and I think that that's a key element, right? In terms of that having the effect, right? The
Mhm.
placebo effect that you're talking about is the intentionality behind it. And I want to use some of these moments here to talk about dry January.
Sure.
And here we are. It's at the 25th of January, and from my perspective, to anybody who has been doing dry January, I just want to say to you, how much better was your month? How much better was your life than what happened in December, or what happened in November, where you were going out to happy hours all the time and you were having gatherings when you're drinking too much? So as a person who is cheerleading for others and their better life, I want to ask that one question. But I also want you to have an opportunity to talk about, what has dry January been like for your business?
It's been incredible. And like I said, we're really only soft launch and pulling some more resources as of right now. But for an example, there's a guy locally here named Chris Marshall, who is a proprietor of Sands Bar. Sands Bar
Hmm.
is
Heard
Austin's
about it.
only non-alcoholic bar. And beyond that, he's actually just a thought leader on the national scene when it comes to sober curiosity. And he named Tenneyson the product that will define non-alcoholic
Ooh.
spirits in 2022, which is fantastic and awesome. I mean, he just had a
Does
huge
that,
write up in Southern Living magazine. And he tastes everything on the market, so that's huge validation.
dude? I gotta say it, right. When in doubt, spit it out. I I had shivers go down my spine as you said that. So I don't know how, like, when you read that the first
Oh,
time, or you heard him
yeah, it was
say that.
incredible,
Oh my
incredible, and
god.
we got so many incoming inquiries just because he's a leader in this space, saying if this guy thinks that this, we're interested in trying it. Hey, can you send us a bottle, or we'd like to place an order, and that type of a thing. So and
That's
also
awesome.
dry January. I think the numbers something like 16-17% of age adults are doing dry January this year, which is the highest it's ever been. We can kind of go into reasoning for that, but we think kind of over serving yourselves throughout the pandemic and now kind of towards the back end of realizing the repercussions of that and trying to make some changes to habits. But you also just look at consumer trends in general. Look at like Beyond Meat and
Mhm.
vaping cigarettes and
Right.
oat milk and these categories of things that people are now leaning into and welcoming alternatives to the traditional because they're either better for you or better for the environment. And that's kind of one of the trends that we're tapping into, is that kind of like sober curiosity is cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of like vaping for cigarettes, or eating you know vegetarian based meat, that it's just kind of the new thing. And on the dry January piece too, I want to highlight um not only how much are you feeling better this month, but beyond then getting to the 31st or the February 1st, and then binging and picking up where you left off on December 30th or 31st. Think of what small step habits that you
Mm.
can change and carry into February, March, April, May,
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily committing to dry every month if you're not interested in that.
Yeah.
But what can you do to be a little bit more mindful? If you can have two, three, four, five less drinks a week, is that going to be beneficial for you? And what are some tools and or products that can help you make some of those more subtle changes that could kind of be a little stickier, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, that's a great point. That reminds me of the book Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg that I recommend to all of my clients. And it is about, making those little incremental changes. And, maybe it is that, like you said, fewer drinks a week, or maybe some days of the week that are just completely zero proof. Because let's face it, at I'll say our age, you're slightly younger than I am. Most people are daily drinkers that I run into, and so yeah, whatever it is that they can take from it, what kind of a tiny habit they can incorporate. I did want to give a moment here. Well, two things I want to do before we wrap up. One, if you're out there and you've got any questions about, starting a business, entrepreneurial stuff, or anything about Sober January, or anything about this delicious beverage here that you can get once you go to the website, and I'll definitely give you a minute there to talk about how people can find you. If you're out there and you've got a question, please drop it in the chat. Would love to have you know an opportunity to engage with the audience, and I really want to honor everybody who has shown up today. So Kenneth Dunner Jr. He's over there on Facebook right now. He's also on LinkedIn. He's one of my favorites out there, and I'm looking forward to making another video for him. Last year when they had the chef Facebook filter, I made a little video for him, and it actually got a lot of views and a lot of traction. So anyhow, if you're out there, please ask a question. And in the interim, why don't you tell people how they can find you?
Sure. So our original plan a couple of years ago, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, when we first started this journey, our plan had been to go traditional brick and mortar beverage distribution. But things changed a little bit. The name of the game was always liquid to lips, but it became kind of a awkward, frowned upon liquid to lips tasting moments in stores, and people were kind of staying home. So we pivoted, and there's so much search and interest online that
Mhm.
we rolled out with our soft launch online. So Tenneyson.com right now is main place to go to place an order. We ship from Austin, but we also now are working with a handful of kind of higher profile non-alc retailers. So we just did a tasting in Houston on Saturday at Sipple and Co. Good friends, Danny and his wife Helenita, were actually the first non-alcohol only package store in the state of Texas. So they do beer, wine, and spirits. So Sipple is one. Better Roads out of Connecticut is one. Spirited Away in New York City just got picked up by Boisson, who's opening their fifth non-alc retail location in New York City. But Tenneyson.com right now is your primary spot to buy.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's amazing. And I would encourage, just entrepreneur to entrepreneur. you listed up a whole bunch of places to find you. I don't know. I mean, I checked your website yesterday. I don't know if you've got all those up there, but so if you're in those geographic areas, then now you can go and find this delicious beverage. And I encourage, anybody who is curious about it, either ask me about it. Of course, find Graham here on LinkedIn and Facebook. Actually, you're on Instagram, right? So Tenneyson is on
Sure.
Instagram.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
And
So
and my
find,
eyeballs are on that as well. So I'm happy to engage and interact and direct because it's the beginning of a really fun journey that I think is going to benefit everybody.
yeah. And I'm feeling like I knew him when, I'm having those moments there when you're talking about, getting named by influencers in the non-alcoholic space, and as a product really to watch for the next year. That's fantastic. I'm so excited for you, Graham. It's so wonderful to watch others succeed and help them out in any way that I can. So if you have any questions, feel free, drop them in the chat. Even though we're going to end this live here in a moment, Graham will be monitoring it. I'll be monitoring it. If there's any questions, we'll be sure to come in and engage with you. Hope you have a absolutely wonderful afternoon, morning, day, whatever you are, whenever you are. And thank you again, Graham, for jumping on here, taking your time to talk about this incredible cause, because that's what I kind of see it as. It really has a cause and it has a purpose,
Sure. Well,
regardless of.
thanks for giving me the platform for
Yeah,
sure. And
yeah,
you're always sharing positivity and good things to think about. So I appreciate being included in that conversation. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. Awesome, awesome, blossom. Well, you have yourself a great afternoon, and thank you everybody who tuned in today. And like I said, please engage in the chat if you have any questions after watching this. All right, take care. Bye bye.